Hello, and welcome to our web series, The Impact of Autism on Blindness and Visual Impairment. My name is Lindsay, and I am a board certified behavior analyst. I will be doing this web series with my colleague, Kristen. We both work at The Village because it takes one. It's an ABA center in Vaughan, Canada. Over the last few years, Kristen and I worked with a client who had the dual diagnosis of autism and blindness. And I admit at first we were a bit stumped as to what to do. When we looked to literature and available resources, we found lots of information on blindness, lots of information on autism, but not a lot of information that combined the two. So we had to do a lot of digging. We had to get creative. We consulted a lot with a multidisciplinary team. There's a lot of collaboration with the family and other key caregivers in the child's life. But we found the process to be hard. And we have learned a lot of things along the way. And we're hoping through this web series that we can share some of the tips and tricks that we've learned to hopefully make it a little bit easier navigating this for other professionals who are kind of in the same boat. What is autism? Sometimes referred to as autism spectrum disorder or ASD. Autism is a developmental disability, and it is marked by two main areas of deficit. The first one is to do with social communication and social interaction. Individuals on the spectrum will communicate in a variety of ways. Some may use alternative or augmentative forms of communication, such as gestures and nonverbal cues, to high-tech devices with communication programs on them, such as Proloquo to Go, and some individuals will communicate vocally. The other key area of deficit is to do with restrictive or repetitive patterns of behavior or interests. It is really important to remember that autism is a spectrum and every individual is very unique, and the ways in which their diagnosis impacts them is also very unique. What is applied behavior analysis, or ABA? ABA is a science devoted to creating socially significant behavior change. Our overall aim is to increase quality of life. So we do that in two different ways. The first way is to increase skills. We want to teach skills that are going to be helpful, functional, and again, try to improve quality of life. The other thing we want to do is to decrease unhelpful or potentially even harmful or unsafe behaviors. ABA is really amazing in that it can be implemented anywhere: daycares, schools, home setting, out in the community, anywhere and everywhere. The Expanded Core Curriculum, or ECC, is an assessment tool and curriculum that is often used with children who are blind or visually impaired. There are 9 key subject areas where skills are assessed and teaching can commence. These are the 9 areas of the Expanded Core Curriculum: assistive technology, career education, compensatory and academic skills, independent living, orientation and mobility, recreation and leisure, self determination, sensory efficacy, and social interaction. Today, we're going to explore the ECC domain of career education. This is teaching the foundational skills needed to prepare for the workforce. This includes exploration of different jobs and different components of different jobs. It also involves taking a deeper look at the individual child's skill set, getting to know their strengths that may lead them to be well suited for a certain type of job. For most typically developing sighted children, they have tons of exposure to different jobs as they just navigate their community and their environments throughout childhood. For example, interacting with the cashier at a grocery store, talking to the librarian at a library. They have lots of different exposure so that by the time they reach high school and start thinking more seriously about future workplace options, they may already have ideas about what they'd like to do. However, for children that are blind, low vision, or autistic children, they may have had limited exposure to different jobs throughout their childhood. That makes career education for these individuals all the more important. These are the 6 areas where you are likely to note the impact of autism on teaching in the 9 areas of the ECC. These areas of impact include social skills, communication skills, behavior, executive functioning, sensory skills, and motor skills. First, we're going to talk about how social deficits may impact career education. Even in this age of technology, you cannot attain or maintain a job without the necessary social skills. Even before you attain a job, you have to go through an interview process. Often that includes email correspondence and then usually an in person or virtual interview. You need to be able to make small talk, answer questions about yourself, and read other people's nonverbal cues. Once you get a job, you need to be able to interact with coworkers. Often, job requirements may include teamwork and collaboration, which may be difficult for learners on the spectrum. As well, they're going to need to make and maintain relationships with coworkers. Maintaining professional boundaries may pose a difficulty for them. As well, they may be sensitive to corrective feedback. So, delivery of feedback and conversations around performance need to be taken very seriously. There is a teaching approach called behavioral skills training that works really well to teach any skill, but I find works particularly well when trying to teach social skills. There are 5 easy steps to conducting behavioral skills training. The first step is that you want to explain to them what you want them to do and why. Why is that skill important to the job that they want to perform? Next, you want to model that expectation. So you would pretend to be them, pretend to be the employee, and model exactly what it is you want them to do in a mock scenario. Then you switch roles and allow them to role play that expectation. Then you provide them feedback on their performance, and that can be both corrective and hopefully positive. And then the last step is just to continue practicing. This can be used again for any skill, but works really well for social skills. Communication skills are obviously a crucial component of learning, but also a very important part of any job. So, when you're considering future workplace options for your learner, you really have to first take stock of their current communication skills repertoire and find a job that is going to be suited to their communication repertoire. You need to consider the fact that they may have difficulty with multi step instructions or very long, complex instructions. They may have an impaired ability to advocate for themselves, to seek help, to seek support when needed. All of these things are very crucial components of success at a job and are necessary considerations. One helpful tool to address the communication barrier is to teach your learner some basic scripts that they're likely to use in the job. I remember when I worked retail, at least 20 times a day, I would say, "Can I help you with something?" That was a very common script for me to use, and it often had a very similar exchange with the customer each time. It was a very predictable interaction, and having known that key phrase, it made it much easier for me to proceed with the interaction. By teaching your learner a few key scripts that they may use in the job, it really helps lower the effort in terms of communication. You can start with a very simple script and very predictable circumstances. And then eventually, as they get comfortable and gain confidence, you can work in maybe some variations of the script or go on to more complex communication skills that they might need. Again, it's helpful to break down longer tasks into smaller steps. Make sure that you're teaching using very consistent language and concise instructions. It's also important to think about learners who maybe don't use typical avenues for communication. Not every learner relies on vocal speech. Some learners may prefer alternative forms of communication, such as typing or using some sort of communication program on a high tech device. Think about alternative ways that you can address communication needs in a workplace using these different methods of communication. It is important to remember that challenging behavior is not an inherent part of autism. Often it occurs when a demand is being placed that the child does not have the skills to perform, or they are not being given adequate supports to be successful in that scenario. Successful career education really needs to work towards finding a suitable work placement that really matches that learner's skill set, their profile, and really caters to their needs. It's important to consider that individuals on the spectrum may have a low tolerance for unexpected events. Um, they really crave structure, predictability, and consistency. Having these components present will help set them up for success. There are many ways in which we can help set a learner up for success and hopefully avoid challenging behavior from occurring. One thing we can do is give notice about potential changes when possible. Sometimes we know changes are going to happen a week or two in advance. For example, we know an employee is going on vacation and they're going to need to provide some coverage. We may know that in advance. However, there are always going to be unexpected things that come up. For example, someone calls in sick and they suddenly have to shift their job duties. That is something that you might not be able to control or give them a heads up about. But what you can do is often we know the type of unexpected things that may occur in a job place, and we can teach to that. We can talk to them about what would happen, kind of explain our contingencies in the event that these things might happen. And you could even role play those scenarios with them. That way, they start to build up a bit of a tolerance to these things happening. So, in the event they do actually occur, they kind of are prepped and ready. It's also really important to think about the fact that even though we're going to do our best to try to set this learner up for success and have the supports in place they need, there are always going to be mistakes. There are always going to be situations that were just totally unavoidable. It is really important to consider the individual's history of challenging behavior and consider that when deciding a work placement to make sure it's an appropriate placement and it's going to be safe for the individual to participate in. Executive functioning skills are the skills we need to execute a plan. This involves things like attention and focus, organizational skills, planning, time management, and problem solving. Often, these skills are impaired for learners on the spectrum. That means they may have difficulty with in the moment problem solving in a job situation, and that may impact job performance. They also may require individualized supports to help them with a job expectation. For example, if they are someone who maybe gets off task or tends to forget what they're doing in the middle of multi step instructions, having a textual schedule that can kind of guide them through the steps may be helpful. They also just may require increased level of supervision on the job. There are several great ways that you can help address deficits with executive functioning. One thing you definitely want to do is teach through experiential learning. That means that you want to get in there and actually get hands on exposure with the skill. It's not enough to just talk about something, you have to actually allow them to experience it, maybe even manipulate the materials they're going to use, but you need to do a component that is hands on. You also want to teach the use of the supports or tools that you're recommending for them. Just because they've maybe used a written schedule to help them with something in the past doesn't necessarily mean they'll be able to apply that tool on their own in a job place. You need explicit teaching around how that tool will be used in that specific circumstance. You also are going to want to teach very job specific problem solving techniques. Do they have a certain person they should go to for help? Is there a certain method of getting help in a workplace? All of that needs to be explicitly taught. Some individuals on the spectrum are either hypo or hypersensitive to different sensory inputs. In a workplace environment, they may be sensitive to bright lights, loud noises, or even just really busy environments. They also might have increased tactile defensiveness, which could pose a barrier for hands on tasks. That's why it's really important to try some of these hands on components ahead of time to know if maybe they find that sort of task aversive. They also may need desensitization to certain attire that comes with a workplace. If they're working at a restaurant that has a uniform, they may want to try it on in advance and see if the material bothers them. All of these are things to explore. A good first step is always to understand your learner's sensory profile. Get to know the things that they like and don't like in terms of sensory input. Then you can conduct your own environmental assessment of a work environment to determine its appropriateness. If you have a learner who finds strong smells really aversive, perhaps a restaurant is not a suitable environment for them. You may also want to work at systematically desensitizing them to any sort of sensory input that is necessary for the job, but maybe not super aversive to them. For example, maybe at first they didn't like the way their uniform felt, but after wearing it a few times, find it tolerable. It's also important that if you're going to do any sort of exploration for them, it's often helpful to give them a warning about what they are going to experience. Describe the experience to them a little bit in terms of things that they may be familiar with. Explain the function of the things that you're going to interact with. Again, giving them that rationale before jumping into the hands-on experience. Autistic individuals may experience deficits with fine motor skills, gross motor skills, or both. This may impact their ability to complete jobs that have more complex motor requirements. It also may impact their ability to conduct a skill independently. It is really important, though, to think about whether their motor deficits may pose any sort of safety concerns. Once you have determined the motor skills needed for a certain job and have determined that they are suitable for that learner, you want to teach those motor skills and you want to teach them to fluency. That means that they don't just do them, but they can do them accurately and they can do them pretty quickly, at least as quick as they're going to need them on the job. It's also important to understand where their threshold is in terms of their motor skills. Just like when you go to the gym, there's a certain point at which you tire out and need a break. That goes the same for any sort of motor skill. So there may be times that they need breaks built into their day. They also might need appropriate tools or aids to assist them with any sort of motor tasks. Don't forget to check out our handout that summarizes all the points we talked about on career education, including possible impacts and considerations. Thank you so much for joining us today in part one of our web series, The Impact of Autism on Blindness and Visual Impairment. Today, we talked about how autism may impact learning about assistive technologies. Thank you so much for joining. Here is our contact information if you wish to reach out. Thank you.